Welcome to Celluloid Citizens, a podcast about film. I'm Brian O'Connell.
And I'm Sean M. Thompson.
And today we're talking about Birth, a 2004 film directed by Jonathan Glazer of Under the Skin fame. Written by Glazer with Jean-Claude Carrière and Milo Attica. And starring Nicole Kidman, Cameron Bright, Danny Houston, and Lauren Bacall of Ridden in the Wind in a supporting role. It's kind of a stacked cast.
It is, including the more of the supporting Anne Heche, Peter Stormare, and Ted Levine.
Oh, and shot by Harris Savides. All right, so you recommended this movie.
Yeah, this movie's crazy. To start with, this is I think the fun thing about this movie is, as I was saying a little earlier to Brian, the plot itself doesn't sound like anything that's like far outside of what Hollywood would normally do.
Yeah.
It's just the angle that the movie takes, and the tone is very different.
Yeah. I mean, as in that discussion we were having, like, I guess we'll just flat out just state the basic premise of this, just so we're all on the same page.
Right. It's going to be hard to analyze it without just giving it away. So full spoilers going ahead.
Nicole Kidman is Anna. She's a widow. Her husband, Sean, died 10 years ago.
I don't think it's not weird watching this movie. It's like, Sean died. That's not Sean. And I'm like, I'm here.
I see. Oh yeah, that would be a little bit uncanny.
It's just my name. No, it's nothing intellectual. It's literally just responding to my name.
Well, she has gotten her life back on track more or less since her loss, and is about to marry her boyfriend Joseph when a 10-year-old boy mysteriously shows up and claims to be Sean, as in the reincarnation of her dead husband. And that's the premise.
As Celluloid Citizen, Sean was saying.
As Sean was saying, it is kind of a premise that you could see being, it's a little weird, but it's not something that's beyond Hollywood, and I could see it like across the film. I was like, I could see this as like a sub-rate romantic comedy with like a weird premise.
Yeah, like, Nicole Kidman just pretends to be Sean's mom, and then they just have like a weird, like mother-son relationship type of thing going on where he's arguing about his lunch. I don't know.
Yeah, or it could be like this like boring conventional drama where the kid is just like, lonely at home and looking for connection, and just trying to, like she like helps him like connect with himself and with others. But this movie takes it in the direction that I believe everybody would be curious about with such a premise, and it's extremely uncomfortable but also extremely fascinating to watch.
It truly is. I'm gonna blank on the name, but there's a great Jack Ketchum novella. I think it's I'm Not Sam, but it's sort of the same premise where this man's wife one day wakes up and thinks that she's like 10 years old.
Ooh.
And it's very uncomfortable.
Well, I want to read that now. But the reference point, I was thinking of basically two movies, and I haven't seen one of the movies, just full disclosure, but I've read a lot about it. The Innocents is I believe a 60s movie based on Henry James's Turn of the Screw, which is about a governess who starts believing the children she's taken care of are possessed by adult ghosts that may have preyed upon them sexually. And there's an undertone of madness and like definitely pedophilic overtones involved. And then the other was, and I think Roger Ebert in his review of the film made this comparison as well. But I don't know, I got, especially with the New York atmosphere and just the general tone, I got Rosemary's Baby vibes from this movie. Would you say that's fair?
I was gonna say, at least with Anna's character and her hair,
Yeah,
she seems very much like an homage to
Mia Farrow.
the character from Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, she's I was gonna the hair is a lot like the Vidal Sassoon haircut in that movie. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to give the impression that this is like a straight genre film, although I do think it has, obviously I would include it. Would I include it in the horror genre? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's another weird thing about this movie is I guess you could say it's a drama that may or may not have supernatural
Elements.
overtones, but I think even just saying it's a drama might not necessarily be
No,
correct because
it doesn't.
there are like thriller elements to it, oddly.
I would say if I had to pick, I would say thriller, but I mean,
Or even like almost a noir type of thing is going on because clearly it's a
yeah,
doomed romance.
it's like, and there's elements, well, so like the film is kind of divided into two halves for me. It's like the first half is kind of a much more directly unsettling what's going on, like eerie vibes and like anxiety and all of that in the first half. The second half, because at some point she does start to accept that this child is who he says he is, it becomes almost like a romantic melodrama or some sort of like relationship movie where it's these characters dealing with like interpersonal relationships, but obviously with this extremely uncanny element at the center of it. And you have like, revelations of secret affairs and like, who's lying and who isn't lying. And it becomes much more conventionally dramatic, but again, at the same time, with this like jarringly weird center to it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say for me personally, when I feel like the turn happens is there's a scene with Nicole Kidman, or sorry, Anna's character and Sean's character, and he's eating ice cream.
Hmm.
And she's just asking him, like, she doesn't, I think, quite believe that he's
Sean yet.
her
Yeah.
dead husband. But she's just going through, like, well, how would you provide for me? And then at one point she goes, how would you, like, fulfill my needs?
Hmm.
And it was like pretty much right after that question, I was like, oh no.
If you're even asking that question, there's already some belief that's being expressed at that point.
And yeah, they keep going from there.
It's extremely uncomfortable. It's in fact, it caused a good deal of controversy,
I mean, I am not surprised.
specifically the scenes where Nicole Kidman where he gets into a bath with Nicole Kidman, and where Anna, I keep saying the actress's name, but Anna, and where Anna kisses him on the mouth. It's not something, I mean, even in a fairly jaded culture at this point, it's not something we're very comfortable with seeing, something we're used to seeing. And I think it makes it all the more effective for it. I kind of enjoy movies that put you in that uncomfortable space, not this specifically, but in general.
No, and I think they did it well because they don't have her actually do anything
No.
other than the kiss on the mouth, which is good because I think if they had gone over that line and actually had her do something, then you no longer would have any. You would be like, this is clearly a crazy pedophile.
Just as we were saying, it could have been like a very generic, Hollywood movie. At the same time,
Right, because they wouldn't have brought up any kind of sexual stuff because honestly, if you were,
yeah.
I mean, just imagine that production meeting. They'd be like, so we're just not doing that.
But at the same time, this could also have gone to the other end of the spectrum and been something really objectionable and extreme and garish. And it really.
Right, it could have easily gone into exploitation
Yeah,
realms
that's.
where it's just for shock and it's like she goes through with it and then her life completely falls apart. And
it's like, voyeuristic and, gross, but this movie, the filmmaking is so good. I've seen Jonathan Glazer's The Fall, his short film, which, by the way, we discussed on a mini episode on our Patreon, so check that out if you're interested.
yes, and by the way, remind me to remind everyone that we have a Twitter and all that stuff, because I have yet to, and we're on like episode 12 now.
We do indeed have a Twitter, but I've seen The Fall. I haven't seen Under the Skin, which I know is his most renowned work.
I mean, I would love to watch, or not watch, but cover Under the Skin.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's how I came to him. I didn't realize it, but he'd done a film called Sexy Beast, which I saw. And, in the way that when you see like a one-off film from a director, sometimes you don't retain the name because you're just like, oh, it's this movie.
Yeah.
But like you're not really following the canon of the director, and you're not really sure, But after I saw Under the Skin and then realized how great he was, I went back and was like, okay, he did this movie called Birth. Interesting. And then I tracked it down and watched it and was like, holy crap.
Well, it's interesting because, I'm coming into this movie with your recommendation, but not really knowing much about it, and not having...
I didn't know anything about it. Like, even people that like Under the Skin, I have to credit the Weird Studies podcast because they mentioned it on their Under the Skin episode.
Oh.
I might not have even tried it otherwise.
Well, I don't hear it mentioned, and I thought Under the Skin was the most... it is the most known and celebrated of his works, so I had no idea what this was. But I was kind of surprised to see, in just like, reading about this film and looking at responses, that it was actually upon its release, it was a box office bomb and also got very mixed reviews. And I was kind of surprised by that watching it because I think, this is just my personal subjective opinion, but I think it's a very well-made film. Even just technically, the cinematography is beautiful. I think the score by Alexandre Desplat, I'm pronouncing that wrong, who's done a lot of scores that I really enjoy and appreciate. I think it's very striking and lovely here. And the Kidman is just phenomenal, and the child, they're all amazing.
Yeah, Cameron Bright does a really good job. Nicole Kidman, this movie is between Bright and Kidman, and again, okay, it's between Anna and Sean, but the whole film relies upon them being very good actors, and they are,
because this is really something that with a bad actor would have fallen right off the cliff.
Even bad supporting actors, it might have bombed. Well, like in terms of artistically. I mean literally it apparently did bomb, but I think Danny Huston does a really interesting job too, because you want to be sympathetic towards the character, and yet he's sort of a shithead.
Yeah, I didn't like him.
But the thing is, I don't think you're supposed to, and I think that's supposed to be another form of tension in the film. Is like, yes, Nicole Kidman clearly shouldn't be
romancing,
running off with a 10-year-old, but at the same time, it's like, I don't think she should really be getting married to Joseph.
They kind of put you in a position where you agree with the 10-year-old, which makes it significantly more uncomfortable, because you don't really want her to get married to this guy. He seems kind of, I don't know, inconsiderate.
He seems kind of weird and controlling, but the thing is, he's fine. He's fine. I just think of him as a normal kind of douche up until there's a moment where they're listening to a band play that I guess they're going to have at their wedding. And this, Sean, the 10-year-old, is kicking his chair, and he says, stop that. And then, just explodes into a fury and, grabs Sean and is dragging him around and, runs into the other room to spank him. And, that is predicated on the scene earlier where, it's one of the big ones, where Nicole Kidman is naked in the bath, and then young Sean shows up and then just starts stripping. And I think if you're like me, you're like, please don't. But And then, you know, he gets nude and he just hops in the tub with Nicole Kidman. And it's interesting because it's like, from like a mother-son dynamic, that would still be weird, but it wouldn't. I mean, whatever. He's 10. I guess he's young enough that it would be like, okay, well, whatever. But like, it's definitely weird. Like the framing of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I really, I mean, again, not a director. I have seen a lot of their work, but I want to familiarize myself with as quickly as possible. The screenwriter, one of the screenwriters, Jean-Claude Carrière, was a big collaborator with Louis Buñuel, the famous surrealist director in his later years, and they often probed areas of sexuality and like uncomfortable like fantasies and like scenarios. And I think the strength of this film is at the same time it manages to be very realistic in its approach, but also just totally surreal. Like that scene where, as you said, he starts spanking him in the middle of a wedding party. It's totally strange because it's the way we would expect a jilted lover to, you know, react to, like, I don't know, like his competitor in real life. But in this, it's just a child, and it's such a jarringly, it's just a really interesting movie in that way, and it explores a lot of that like uncomfortable ambiguity you were talking about.
No, it's true. And to be fair, clearly Joseph's outburst is brought on because he has. I'm pretty sure he knows that this 10-year-old is in the bathroom with his soon to be wife. So I don't think he's thrilled with that. And indeed, he shouldn't be thrilled with that. That's very disturbing. But there are ways to approach that. Like maybe the first one is
Yeah.
you're like, hey, honey, why are you in the bathroom with a 10-year-old?
Can we get rid of that? Yeah.
But like just
I
flying off the
mean,
handle and like beating a 10-year-old is not really the answer.
yeah.
Because at best, it is the reincarnated
Sean.
dead husband of your soon to be wife, and at worst, you're just beating up a mentally ill 10-year-old.
And just to get into that, this is major spoiler territory. The film really doesn't seem to come down on that question about whether or not he is a mentally ill child or the actual reincarnation of Sean. They offer a kind of explanation, like I guess more of a refutation is the right word. But I never really fully bought basically what they offer in the middle of the movie, or toward the end, I should say, because it's like, well, let's just say what happens. Basically, Sean's brother's wife, Clara, had been having an affair with the real Sean, and that's how she knows that he isn't Sean. He can't be Sean because he didn't love Nicole. In fact, he never opened any of her love letters and gave them to Clara as a proof of his love. And she buried these, and these letters were read by the 10-year-old Sean. And it's kind of implied that maybe he's behaving this way because he's read the letters and knows all of this information he wouldn't otherwise know.
Right, and it would be very easy to just completely buy that. And indeed, this is my second watch, and I think on the second watch, much like the first, I did think like, well, there is a strong possibility this is just a mentally ill 10-year-old that happened to read these letters, and
Yeah.
you know, he's fixating upon this glamorous, clearly wealthy woman.
Yeah, but like the thing I love about it, and this is something I love about a lot of, again, I'm using the word horror kind of loosely here because I wouldn't necessarily call this movie scary, even in the.
I mean, there's a lot of uncomfortable stuff, but there's nothing outright
But
scary.
I guess this would be closer to something like weird fiction or something like that. But like things about disconcerting stories that may or may not involve a supernatural element.
Yeah, it's very uncanny. Like in just thinking of an analog in literature, I would think of Robert Aikman.
Oh yeah, I've been reading one of his.
He does a lot of stuff where it's like very vague about whether there is something supernatural or not, and this made me think of his work because a lot of the time it will just be a story about, a rich couple and they're, vacationing somewhere, and then there's a thing and it may or may not be supernatural.
Yeah, with this movie, what I love, and this is again, this is something that a lot of good fiction of this type does. It gives you an explanation that could plausibly explain away the whole thing, but that explanation still doesn't feel right. You know what I mean? Like I think that's like a very tactful thing to do. Is that like, yeah, you could see this movie and walk out thinking, well, Sean, read those letters and, maybe had some sort of fantasy or was maybe disturbed in some way and behaved like the dead husband. And it was just, like, an unfortunate hallucination. But nobody walks out of the movie feeling that way, I would think. Like, you walk out of the movie saying, yeah, that could have happened, but it doesn't feel like that's what happened.
No, it doesn't feel right. And in particular, in one of the final scenes, it's kind of intercut between Nicole Kidman, or sorry, Anna, and she is getting married to Joseph. And I believe it's May, because they said earlier in the film they're going to go to this beach house and have it in May.
Yeah.
And it's intercut with Sean reading from a letter he wrote to her saying, like, they don't know what happened to me, but they say I just had, like, kind of like a mental break.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing a lot better now. And he ends it, though, by saying, see you in another lifetime, which is a really weird thing for a 10-year-old. I mean, this whole thing is weird for a 10-year-old, but, like, see you in another lifetime, I don't think is something a 10-year-old writes.
And just like when he's talking about like, I'm having a lot of fun with my friends and like he's like smiling for the picture, I just don't buy it. Like, because it's like the thing about the film is that it subjects you to this intense emotional experience of like you believe for a while that he's the reincarnation. At least I did, because everything's set up that way. But even when that explanation is like explained away, it doesn't feel right. And additionally, the effect the whole thing has had on Anna, and by extent the audience, is so significant that it may as well have been real, because at the end she's not, just happily going off into marriage. She's, anguished and weeping and like throwing herself into the ocean. And it's like, even if the experience was a whole deception, for a time it was real to her and to us, and that alone has had a devastating impact. I can't imagine what she must be feeling, that she fell in love with a 10-year-old boy and believed that he was her dead husband. That's uncanny in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the film does really well is, yeah, even if you do think that Sean was just a disturbed little boy, the revelation for Anna's character is that she is not okay, even 10 years later, with her late husband's death. And indeed, she like has been pretending that she's completely okay and that, she's going to marry Joseph and that's going to be fine. But I think what young Sean coming in does is kind of shakes her out of that daze and makes her realize, like, oh, I'm totally not fine. Like, even if that wasn't my dead husband, I'm not okay right now.
Yeah, he's like a little bomb that just walks into their apartment and explodes all illusions of security, and then he just leaves, and you believe that, you may believe that he was just a disturbed child, but you don't accept it, if that makes sense. And I think it's just, I mean, if it's a film about anything, Glazer said he wanted to make a film about the, enduring power of love, but what I see more is the enduring power of grief and the long-term impact that can have on someone, even, 10 years later after the loss has occurred.
Yeah, I mean, some people would argue that grief and love are actually the same thing because
Yeah,
like the more
yeah.
you love someone or your pet or whatever,
The more you
when it
grieve.
passes, that's like you grieve more. And grief is weird, like in and of itself. So yeah, I think the film is mainly a reflection on grief
Yeah.
and how you can think you're okay and kind of convince yourself you're fine, and then out of nowhere you're just weeping in your wedding gown trying to toss yourself into the ocean.
Yeah, and think about that as well, that when Sean himself says, I'm not Sean, whether or not that be true, it's like a second loss for her. That she's believed her husband has come back and she finally has a chance to reunite with him. And it just falls apart right in front of her. And it is a movie that displays that principle very well, I think, that you were talking about. That the intensity of the grief is proportionate to the love you felt for the person who you're grieving.
But yeah, but the film also does a great job of is when they have that turn where excuse me, I'm gonna look up the name where Anne Heche's character Clara shows up and tells this little boy, "You can't be the reincarnation of her dead husband because he didn't love her, he loved me."
Yeah.
That starts to bring up some weird questions as well, because you start to
Yeah.
wonder like, well, if it's like just the soul of this person, and clearly they're 10, so they don't really have any sexual anything, if you're just getting to the love aspect, like maybe Sean never actually loved Clara, his mistress. Maybe it was just a physical thing.
Yeah.
It just gets into some really interesting headspace.
Yeah, and you also mentioned that scene where Clara talks to young Sean has the weirdest line in the film.
Yeah, I would say probably the most disturbing line in the entire film because, like at least Anna hints around like
And
how
was
would you
resistant to it for a
yeah, like
time.
how would you, she says how would you she doesn't say pleasure me, like how would you fulfill my needs or something like that. Whereas Clara's character just outright says, if you had been him, I would have been willing to explore that. I.e., I would have banged a 10-year-old, which is like, ugh, wow, okay.
And it's an abnormal thing to say for obvious reasons, but it's also if he wasn't Sean reincarnated, why would you say that to a child? Like, I think touches like that just muddy the waters even more, because when she speaks to him in that scene, she's not talking like you talk to a child. She's kind of talking like you would talk to, like she might have talked to Sean about the same and it's just it's a very strange and very, very uncomfortable experience.
I think one of the more interesting things about this film is that part of the reveal that Sean may or may not be the dead husband comes down to the fact that at one point he's like very distraught and he climbs a tree because he is 10. I guess that's,
Yeah.
even if your mind's a 40-year-old, your body's still a 10-year-old. Well, that's an interesting thing too. Like, how does that work? But anyway,
Yeah.
I'll go.
Well, but can I just say one? I mean, like, there's another thing. There's a scene in Sean's house where the mom comes in and tries to soothe him after an outburst. And he just says to the mother, I'm not your stupid son anymore. But the inclusion of the anymore in there really complicates it for me.
Yeah, because then that also makes you wonder, like, has he always been the dead husband and just realized recently that he is? Or is it like a thing where the dead husband just showed up when he was 10?
Is it like a possession thing, or is it like, because he talks about like, how did you know Rashawn died? And he says, I got a deja vu feeling. And also, knowing where Sean died wouldn't have been something that you could have gleaned from the love letters, certainly.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, he wouldn't have said that.
No.
Like, or none of them would have, because
he died.
They're not written after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it leaves it quite open-ended, I think, with this whole...
It does, yeah, but getting back to what I was bringing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what's weird is another turn is that when the cops confront young Sean, he's like, I can't be her dead husband because I love her, which is such an evocative line.
Yeah.
where it's like, I can't be her dead husband because I love her and I don't love this other woman who I was apparently sleeping around with. And you start to wonder, like, well, does that hold up though? Like, maybe it is actually her dead husband because he does love her.
I don't know. It's really it's mystifying, and a lot of people were irked by that twist, but I think it actually
I like it though. I don't. If they had tied it up one way or the other, I don't think I would have
I
liked the film as
agree.
much.
I think it's just another wrench thrown into your perceptions about what this is going to be and what it's going to do. And I really appreciate that, just, from a person who wants to be unsettled, this film really goes that extra mile of just like,
Right. And even if it's not supernatural, it does bring up interesting questions about grief as well, where it's like people tend to glorify people once they have died.
yeah.
But all of this information lets you know, like, you've been kind of rooting for this dead guy who hasn't even been there or may have been there.
Yeah.
And then this reveal reveals he wasn't actually that nice. He was cheating on his wife, who
Yeah.
loved him a ton.
I mean, the Sean as he appears in the 10-year-old is more like Nicole Kidman's character's ideal of Sean than the actual Sean, who turns out, as you said, to be like a lying, cheating bastard. This Sean is very attentive and genuinely loves Nicole. It's very strange.
It is, and then you can start to wonder too, like, well, how much of that is it because he's
Yeah.
10 years old? Because even if it is a 40-year-old kind of mind,
Is there some sort of
that's what I
blurring?
was going to bring up earlier. Like, do they merge? Is it like the 40-year-old and the 10-year-old are kind of combined? Because there are scenes where he's eating ice cream and cake and like climbing trees.
Yeah, and going to school and
Right. So is it like the 40-year-old man remembers who he was but is still a 10-year-old, or is it just like a complete possession where he's just a 40-year-old man inside a 10-year-old's
I have a
body?
lot of questions about the 10 years preceding. Like, did he always have these memories? Or, like, the any more in that sentence really, like, has a lot of implications for it. Or maybe it's something that's coming to him in pieces, and that's why it's deja vu when he walks over the spot. I don't know. But I mean, I appreciate that this film, again, really thought about its premise and considered, where to go and what questions to answer and what not to answer.
I mean, I would argue the film probably didn't well. Bleh. The film probably didn't do well because it was a bit before its time. I was in college in 2004, and I can tell you, like, the output wasn't. I mean, you would have your intellectual films, but like,
Like this?
I mean, I don't think we were at the point where like a big star could be in a really. I mean, I guess so, but it's like Nicole Kidman's huge, and so most of the people that are going to go to a Nicole Kidman movie are expecting the same kind of big budget, like entertaining but not really thought provoking.
Yeah, but and
And then you hit them with this.
even by the standards of weird movies, this has like especially alienating subject matter, like sex and kids. Hey, it's like it's not like an accessible film by any stretch of the imagination in that regard.
And you can tell there are people that went to it just liking Nicole Kidman who were probably appalled.
Yeah.
It is weird, yes. No, because it could have been played for laughs much more. It could have been like, we're going to go, like she takes him to the park. That, like, another screenwriter or director might have played that up for laughs way more. Like, do you want to go down the slide, honey? Like,
Yeah.
but like they don't do that. She's just sort of like completely straight faced, like, oh, I'm going to be, she calls Sean's mom to say, oh, he's going to be spending another night. And it's like, it gets into this borderline, like, pedophilic, like, oh, is there an abuse thing going on?
Well, like the fact that I mean, actually, that scene when they're riding in the carriage, like it's almost like a parody of like a romantic scenario that they're like in this carriage riding through the snow, where she says to him, you'll find someone your own age. You'll get over me or whatever. And then he just like it's a very slight smile and he looks at her and it's just the weirdest. That was the moment where I really bought it, that I was like, okay, this kid may be who he says he is. Subtle.
Yeah, Cameron Bright does a really good job because he's very like still and subtle and subdued, and it really works because it lends this mysterious, like if he had been just like a 10-year-old acting like a 10-year-old
But
normally
like,
would,
could you? I
you
mean,
instantly would be like, nah, I'm not buying this.
with the
But he is very like, I
austere.
hesitate to say erudite, but he's
Yeah.
very
Like, we were talking about the importance of performances. If this had been a bad child actor, this movie would have been like a laughing stock and something you would watch for fun to laugh. Because could you imagine if this premise went wrong? Like, it would be either ridiculous or seriously objectionable. But I think, in a large part because of his performance, and again, also the performance of Nicole Kidman, it enters in a space that may not work for everyone, but if it does, it's a very, like, uneasy but still restrained and composed place that I found. I think it's just rare in cinema.
It is. It makes you uncomfortable, but it never goes over that line.
Yeah.
So you can always pull back and be like, well, yeah, she kissed a 10-year-old on the lips. That's not the most
It's never quite disgusting, if that makes
right,
sense.
like cuz like feasibly a grown woman could kiss a 10-year-old child on the lips and you would just be like, "Oh, it's like a motherly thing."
Yeah, it's just yeah, yeah.
I mean, maybe not that long, but
And her eye, it's like the most unromantic kiss ever because she's just stiff and frozen and her eyes are wide open and they're not glamorizing it or anything.
no, I do think that moment there is sort of a funny aspect to it where Arliss Howard, who plays Bob, I don't think we've mentioned him yet, but he plays, I believe it's Sean's friend.
Sean's the doorman?
No. The man who interviews Sean.
Oh, the dead Sean's brother-in-law,
That is
I
his
think.
brother. Okay, or brother-in-law.
I think brother-in-law because the guy from Fargo.
Well, anyway, he comes downstairs to just check on Nicole Kidman's character, Anna's character, and spots her kissing a 10-year-old boy. And like they sort of almost play it like that whole like, oh, I caught your wife kissing another man, but just like
Well, that's the thing.
you can tell that this dude's mind is just like, oh my god, what do I even say to
Like,
this?
but that's the thing, and that's where kind of a lot of the dark humor lies for me. The second half, again, it's kind of hitting the beats of a normal romance story and like a love triangle story, but obviously, again, in a super uncomfortable and unnatural way. Like, the jealous lover, beating up his wife's lover, or the like, kiss on the sidewalk that's spotted by, some relative. Like, these are cliches almost in a normal romance movie.
Right, but I think the whole movie is about inverting expectations
Absolutely.
and playing tropes kind of against you.
If there's any point or subtext, it's that. It's to unsettle you in a way that unsettle not just in the usual sense of making you uncomfortable, but also disorienting you and providing you with like a surreal fractured image of like the normal types of movies you get from these sorts of premises. I think actually a big Hollywood star like Nicole Kidman being in it helps that because it just makes it all the more
Right, because how many films has she done that are probably exactly like the normal, it's like the kiss on the sidewalk and it's with a full-grown man, or the jealous lover getting beaten up.
Yeah, I mean, although, we have talked before, she did do The Killing of a Sacred Deer, which I
Yeah,
feel...
she does, I respect her. She makes interesting choices. She was in,
Yeah.
not like this was a bold move, but she was in a film called The Others that I thought she did a decent job in, which
Oh, yeah, I heard
think
that was
is
good.
like sort of vaguely related to Turn of the Screw.
Yeah, I think it's inspired. I haven't seen it, but I think it
I mean,
draws
it's
on
like
that.
it's not remarkable, but it was definitely I remember liking it.
She makes interesting choices. And I would say, just bringing up Killing of a Sacred Deer, this kind of does feel like a relative to Lanthimos. Like, if I had to, analogize it to some other director, this feels very like in line with with his movies like The Lobster and The Killing of a Sacred Deer, right down to like the kind of oddly mannered acting. Obviously, it's not as extreme here as it is in, in Lanthimos's films. But there is something slightly off, especially in the early scenes of like the birthday party and the engagement, and just the way the characters are speaking, that added to that uncomfortable vibe for me.
It's true. I don't know how related this is to, segueing into, but I just remembered there is a shot with Anna where she's at, I think it's the opera.
Yes, oh.
And they hold on her face as she's sort of like going through the motions of like, could that be my dead husband? Of course that's not my dead. This is early in the film too. Of course it's not my dead husband because it's a 10-year-old. But you see all these emotions wash over her face, which reminded me of the last scene of Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Oh yeah.
And I think I had seen it shortly before or after I watched Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and I remember being struck by that shot because they do hold on her face, but this is like, and clearly it had been done before, but 2004, I mean, it's like
such
a while before.
It's amazing how she conveys that range. I think later she says that it's the first time she really realized or whatever, but she's like she's kind of composed but clearly like not okay for most of that shot, like her eyes are teary, and then her husband touches her and for a moment her face just seems to like split almost, like she's like about to cry, and it's just remarkable acting. And then the other scene I loved is when she's talking to Clara and Clifford, Sean's brother, about the whole situation. And she just starts off describing it normally, but she starts to ramble and like, again, like to tear up, but like is like trying to like write it off, like, I'm being crazy, but at the same time she really believes it. And it's like top shelf acting. Well done, Nicole Kidman. If you're listening.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, this film, even though the plot clearly, is heavy in the film, I would say it's much more of a piece on just character studies and acting.
It's a very good movie for actors.
I actually hadn't even thought of this before recording, but Clifford's character, Peter Stormare, does a really good job because it's kind of hard to even realize it, but like he is playing someone whose brother died.
Yeah.
But then you have to wonder, how much did he know about if his brother was sleeping with his girlfriend or wife, who's played by Clara, because they're supposed to be together, right?
Having an affair.
So then it's like he's in this weird headspace of like, he clearly loved his brother, but it's also like his brother was sleeping with his wife, which is another notch against like dead Sean, where it's like, wow, he really was an asshole.
There's this scene where young Sean sees Clifford for the first time and like hugs him really tightly, and there's something very subtle about the way Clifford, Peter Stormare I should say, plays it. It's like, and I hadn't thought about that either, but like, did he know about the affair, and like how is he responding in that moment?
Right, because I believe he says something like, that's not Sean. So it's either something really sad, like his brother wasn't that nice, or it could be just he's so still angry about the fact that his dead brother was sleeping with his wife and maybe he never got to confront him about it.
It's a film that is just, I'm seeing a quote from the screenwriter Jean-Claude Carrière right now. He said, we aimed to make something robust in which every question leads to another. And that's a really summative of this film's like effect.
Yeah, because if you look at it at surface, even if you wrote it off as like it's a disturbed 10-year-old who read some love letters and then hyper-focused on this grown woman,
there's still
still the question of like, well, how did he know where the husband had died? And it's like, you could say, oh, maybe he was there that day, but no, that doesn't even work because he wasn't born yet.
And we see the whole opening shot. Nobody was around to witness.
No, there was no one around. Yeah, it's like you could maybe it was like the dad or the mom was there, but it's like, no, of course not. There was no one there.
And I highly doubt that he Googled this information or, like, researched it. It's just Roger Ebert again said something like, neither explanation fully explains the events of the film. Like, if you think he's. And I think that's really effective. I think I really appreciated a film that's challenging like that.
So I guess we're getting near the end, but we'll go into final thoughts. But I guess the big question for both of us is, do you think that that was the reincarnation of Anna's dead husband?
I
mean, it's hard to say one way or the other because the film intentionally makes it so vague, but
I would say I'm not sure it's either one of the explanations that are offered, and I'm not certain it's as clear cut. But if I had to skew, like, on like the spectrum of, like, is it more like a plausible thing that just happened, because of a mental illness, or is it something supernatural or uncanny or, like, fantastical? I would say I would skew right now more toward that he was the reincarnation, or that something unnatural is going on, than the technically plausible but kind of weirdly absurd, like, logical explanation. I think the supernatural explanation kind of addresses it better. If that's my take.
yeah, because there are other things too, like when Arliss Howard's character of Bob, who I think is the brother-in-law, when he's interviewing Sean, and Sean says, like, I'm pretty sure he says we fooled around one time, right? Something along those lines. Okay, why would those be in love letters? Like, why would that like,
Yeah,
you
it's
know what I
kind of.
mean? Like, I don't think a man who seemingly identified as straight would randomly mention in a love letter, like, oh, one time I banged Bob.
Did. No, they. I think he was talking about him and Nicole Kidman having sex on Bob's couch.
Oh, okay. I totally misread that. That's my mistake. I will admit to that. Because I had listened to that and thought it was like him admitting that the two of them
Had
had sex, and then I was
experimented.
like, wow, that's really outlandish.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I could see how that.
Okay, but even still, like,
Even still,
how would he know? Like, feasibly, he could have mentioned that in a love letter, but, like,
it's not
I mean, would he really
something.
have done that?
I mean, you could say that this boy, who just happens to be named Sean, happened to be in the park and happened to dig up these love letters and read them and mentally seized upon them that he was the man in the love letters, and, made some guesses and knew some things and just behaved.
And they're very big guesses, by the way.
Yeah, and you could believe that, but it relies on so many coincidences that I think the.
Yeah, it's almost harder to believe it's just a deranged 10-year-old than it
To
is to
believe that he's
believe it's the
Sean, yeah.
reincarnated husband.
It's so that's what I mean. Wrapping it up a little bit, I think that this film is incredibly rewarding if this is the sort of experience you enjoy, where it's directly challenging your faith in the stability of a narrative and, like, the duty of an author to provide, an explanation. It's very challenging, and it's fun to think about and talk about.
Yeah, no, as stated, I've seen this film twice now, and I still think I could, watch it again, and I still think there are things I could take from it. Like, for instance, the first watch, I was so preoccupied with, obviously, Anna's character and Sean's character.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about, like, the supporting cast, but on the second watch, you're starting to wonder about the supporting cast more, like how does Clifford feel? Because, like, Clifford's in this just really bizarre. It's like he probably misses his dead brother, but then it's like he might be mad at his dead brother for sleeping with his wife or girlfriend.
It's strange.
And then he's like going to his dead brother's wife's house to watch her get married to another man.
Yeah, it's very, like, it's a rich movie in that it has a lot of, like, avenues to explore. I don't know. I mean, I just feel it's worth mentioning the strange presence of Lauren Bacall. Not strange, not in that, it's odd for her to be acting, but that she's second billed on the poster, and, was the center of another minor controversy surrounding this film.
She was?
Yeah, Nicole Kidman stated at I think some sort of press conference that like, oh no, wait, I'm getting it wrong. A journalist described Kidman as like a screen legend, and then Lauren Bacall said, "Oh, she's a beginner," and it's like, yikes. So there is like some sort of like controversy between the two of them.
Yeah, I mean, but to be fair, that is Lauren
It
Bacall
is.
saying
It's
that.
true. She is a star of old Hollywood. I've only seen Written on the Wind, but I loved it, and she's very good.
I haven't really seen. I'm sure I've seen older movies with her in it, but I mean, yeah. Either way, that's sort of a flippant kind of shitty thing to say.
Yeah, but at any rate, she's this mother figure in the movie. And she seems, I don't know, the presence of the family in this whole thing struck me as strange in and of itself. Like I was expecting when I heard the plot this to be some sort of like intimate.
Yeah, it would be like Nicole Kidman and then the younger character and then the
Yeah,
husband.
but there's a lot of characters are present for the whole thing and like hearing the same things Nicole Kidman's hearing, and it's that like, I don't know, it just adds another dimension I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, Eleanor or Lauren Bacall's character of Eleanor does an interesting job too, because she's another voice of reason, like grilling this kid, like, so you're her dead husband. Okay. Why now? And she has a pivotal role near the end of the film where it's Nicole Kidman, no matter what it actually is, she thinks that young Sean is just a disturbed boy. And she realizes, like, oh no, like, I was going to get married to this guy who probably hates my guts right now. So she's talking to her mother, who says, you know, just go and apologize to him. Something along those lines. So she's sort of this voice of reason, but even she, you sense from her acting that even she's sort of curious, like, is that actually her dead husband? Because she never she never seems very sure when she's like, oh, that's not. At first she sounds very sure, but like as the film goes on, she doesn't seem that sure it isn't like the dead husband. I think she's just being like practical, like even if it is, it's not going to work out.
Yeah, nobody seems very sure. Yeah, I think actually the characters, the more aggressive they are that it isn't Sean, the more it seems like they actually somewhat do believe it's Sean and are frightened of that possibility. Like, there's a lot of, I mean, it's a film that carries a lot of ideas and like unaddressed plot elements that you could have a field day exploring, and I mean that's just so valuable, I think.
No, I really respect this film. And I mean, I never actually said whether I believe it or not. I think I am going to go on the side and say that I think it's her dead husband.
Yeah, in some way or
In some way, yeah. I don't think it's a straight 1-to-1 is the thing. I think the reason that the kid is confused is because it isn't clear cut. Like, I don't know that he was in his body the entire time. Or maybe he did just realize at 10, like, who he was before. There's a lot of questions.
No, I don't understand why this movie got, like, I guess virtually panned, but I would highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it, because it's like an underrated gem, you know? It's surprising.
No, I really liked this film, and again, I was shocked I hadn't heard anything about it, and I think the only thing I can come up with is it's so psychologically difficult for people that maybe they just don't want to bother.
A lot of people may not want to explore this idea.
I mean, as a rule, if you talk to casual film fans who aren't like you or me, who like really love and live for movies, you know, like if you talk to my dad, like, no offense against my dad, he has some decent taste sometimes, but most of the time he says I want to watch stuff explode. So not everyone wants to like sit. I mean, this is not like a fun Saturday night movie you invite friends for. This is a very like internal, like watch it on a slightly depressed evening.
And I mean, because I guess the most uncomfortable part of it, and the part that makes people is it forces you to question what would you do in a similar situation. It's like a great what if movie in that way. Like, what if an ex-lover showed up to you in the body of a child or of a different person and said, that they want to come back into your life. Like, and it forces you to actually engage with that idea in a way that, again...
Yeah, I mean, I think on my end, there is one point where Nicole Kidman's like, we're going to go somewhere and I'm going to wait until you turn, I don't know, 21.
Yeah, and
I don't know that I would leave with them, but I would probably still keep in touch and just be like, yeah, you're 13, so we still have to wait another 20 years or whatever.
yeah, but it's like, even that is ethically weird.
But even that is sort of like, oh, is that
Is that
responsible
like
even?
grooming in this case?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions.
But and they're uncomfortable questions, and I think people, and I can't entirely fault them. People looking to, just like have fun on a movie night are not going to enjoy asking those questions.
Yeah, because it's also not like, there are films about the abuse of children or, sexual violence towards children. But usually it's a lot easier to play those as like, this terrible monster did this thing and you have to have the compassion to think of them still as a human being.
Yeah.
This one kind of requires you from the gate to be like, you just like this character and you're okay with her from the beginning, and then you get progressively less okay with her as the film goes, but then it's still a gray area, so you're like, is it so bad? But it is so bad because it's illegal and it's a 10-year-old.
Like, but even like the choice of making Anna's fiance like an unlikable character and making you...
Right, because if he had been really likable, it'd be like, oh, no contest, like, go away, 10-year-old boy.
But it almost frames it like you're supposed to want them to get together, but you obviously don't, because again, he's a child, he's a 10-year-old. And
I mean, there was a weird part of me that was like, maybe they do go off, and
no, me too.
She just acts like his mom for like 10 years or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's really weird, but it's like, I mean, she still might be happier than if she had stuck with Joseph.
Yeah, no, I agree. If he's the love of her life, But then again, like, is it like riding off into the sunset, or is it child abduction?
Yeah, and then even then, this is implying that that they don't wait, and then he just starts cheating on her again once he's of age.
Yeah, so this is a
like,
film.
How terrible would that be?
That would be, I mean, this is a film that asks tricky questions, and that's honestly, especially today and in very like complacent and unquestioning time, that's like the most generous thing, I think. That films that trouble you.
We've seemed to pick out a lot of films that are very ambiguous, and I think that's because they're more fun. They are more fun to talk about. I mean, you can still see a really good movie with a clear-cut
absolutely
ending, but something about really vague films, when they're done well, by the way. There are plenty of vague films that are just very frustrating if they're done poorly. But yeah, not being clear-cut and being vague can be... I mean, we've spent an hour talking about this movie. I've seen this movie 2 times. Like, if this had been a very clear-cut, like, oh, it's not her son, then I don't know that I would have watched it again.
Yeah, no, there are movies that can be unsatisfyingly vague or, like, overly abstract, but this is a movie that hits just the right tone of, it being fun to question whether or not it's real or not, without it being like so ambiguous that you can't latch on to anything. And those are the most fun movies to talk about for obvious reasons, and that, they give you a lot of fodder.
Right. A lot of people come down on the side of wanting to discuss bad films, and this will be my final little caveat. We'll probably cover films that I don't like.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't want to go out of my way to pick films that are bad films to only talk about, because I think that is really low-hanging fruit. Like, there is like a whole industry of people who profit off of terrible films.
Yeah.
And indeed, I like Mystery Science Theater 3000. I like riff tracks. I like all those things.
Yeah.
Every once in a while where they're ripping on a terrible movie, but it's like, it's so easy to do that.
Yeah.
I would much prefer to talk about films that people maybe haven't heard of, or films that just hold up to rewatch.
Yeah.
Because I really do love films, and I do like, I don't go to the movies or, rent a movie thinking, gee, I hope this is bad so I can rip it apart on social media.
Yeah. I actually, for the most part, don't enjoy watching bad movies. I mean, And here's the thing, like, I find that when people say a movie is really bad, what they mean is like excruciatingly mediocre. I think there's something very entertaining and rewarding about a film that's like abysmally bad or like spectacularly bad. But like, movies that are just dull or dragging or poorly made, I mean, you could tear them apart all day, but it's not something that feels, nurturing or exciting to engage with. Whereas a film like this,
I think, yeah, I think too much of our culture is slants negative. Like it's so much
yeah,
easier to be negative because people will respond to that. But the thing is, like I'm attracted to art because I want it to like bring about this escapism to sort of help me forget like the terrible crap in life. I don't
yeah,
want to just like ruminate in a terrible film because life sucks, you know?
yeah, and I would say it goes even beyond escapism and just something that's just stimulating and exciting. And I mean, like, I enjoy plenty of films that couldn't reasonably be called escapism, but they're still bringing like a new way of looking at the world, or like,
That's true. I think escapism is probably the wrong
yeah,
term. It's just sort
I
of a catch all I use because, yeah, like there are definitely movies that we've covered, like Killing of a Sacred Deer. It's like, I don't want to live in that.
no, but it's something. The beautiful thing about art is that it can, I mean, at its most powerful, it can change you, but it provides not always an escape. I mean, certainly sometimes an escape, but just a fresh perspective, or a like an intriguing scenario, or I mean, and they play it very realistically in this movie, but it's still like it's a question of fantasy in the end. Like, what if this strange abnormal thing happened, and that's, that can provide a welcome relief from the horrible reality we seem to be living right now.
I mean, even putting aside the plot of the film, just watching a film set in New York
Oh
City
yeah.
where people are just walking around, like currently is very surreal because you just realize how COVID-19 is like screwed with everything. Like I don't think we're going to be getting movies set in New York for years.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy.
Or like if they are, it'll be in the new New York where it's like people are wearing masks. Or even if we get a vaccine, there's still going to be that part of you that's like, oh, we got to be careful in the bigger cities.
Yeah. And just touching upon that, in such a surreal time as the one we're now living in, maybe movies like this that are surreal are more accurate and enlightening about our experiences than movies that are, any more realistic in the traditional sense.
Yeah, I really feel like I didn't bother to read the article, but there was something about a weasel that went into a hadron collider and like put us into the wrong timescape. Since 2016, I've sort of felt like that. Like it's like everything is so surreal now that it's like hard to. It almost feels like I'm living in a dream. It's like there was a thing about murder hornets less than a month
Latch
ago, and
on.
I'm already like not even thinking about it.
I know. I mean, the past 4 years have been rough, but I think this year it's almost like it's like a cosmic joke, like just like a punishment trip.
Like if I legitimately believed in God, I would think it's the end times, but I don't because again, somehow tying it back to this movie, that's far too concrete. I don't think it's that easy.
Yeah,
Even if there is a God, I don't think it's that easy.
yeah. And I think, even like, I mean, Jonathan Glazer is clearly a director, and again, I've only seen this in The Fall, but The Fall too.
I mean, we gotta cover Under the Skin. Under the Skin is like his more overt horror
I've seen,
film. And indeed, Sexy Beast is also very interesting, but it's Sexy Beast is much more of a like odd crime
yeah,
thriller.
okay. Well, I mean, I've seen like that one image from Under the Skin of the skin in the void. And it's just images like that, and premises like the one this movie explores kind of shock you out of your complacency. And I think that in times like these, art like that is more important than ever.
It is more valuable, yeah. It's more valuable to actually be wondering about stuff.
Yeah.
rather than just being told
This is the thing.
how things are.
But on that note.
Also, and I'm sure we mentioned it, but before we go.
Oh, yes.
Beautifully shot film. Like, it's very pretty to look at. Obviously, we've mentioned the acting and the score a little bit, but the cinematography
I couldn't tell if
great.
it was the lo-fi streaming service I was watching this on or the cinematography, but there was this very like fine layer of grain that just brought out the hues and everything, and just it was very rich visually.
I honestly don't know, because I've watched it streaming 2 times now, and they've both been sort of similar.
Yeah.
Not the highest, like,
Resolution.
It hasn't been on Amazon Prime. It is on Prime, I think, but you have to
pay for it.
And I found it on Voodoo or something.
Voodoo.
I can't keep Voodoo. That's it. I'm thinking of movie.
Yeah. Movie, which we again talk about on our The Fall episode on Patreon. Check it out.
Oh yes, but okay, so we're ending this episode, so I finally have to actually fucking do all the shit you're supposed to do with the podcast, which I haven't done for the last 2 months. So we have a Twitter. The official Twitter is at Celluloid Sits with a Z.
With a Z.
That's primarily where Brian and I have been promoting the podcast. I'll be honest, I don't think I'm going to make a Facebook page because I just don't think they work anymore.
No, they don't.
But we have our official, I guess, address would be the Anchor site, which is, I believe it's anchor.fm/celluloidsits, again with a Z.
Yeah.
And I will probably leave that in the show notes, links to that. My official Twitter is at SpookySeanT. Brian, what's yours?
I'm at _Shehog_. I'm sorry, that's a hard.
I'll link to it. It's fine. And we have an official YouTube channel, which I can't remember now if it's Celluloid Citizens all the way. Well, whatever. I'll link to it.
It's Celluloid. You can find it if you.
Yeah, just if you go on YouTube and search for Celluloid Citizens, it'll pop up.
But until then, don't go kissing little boys.
I mean, every day I wake up. No, I'm kidding. That's a terrible joke that makes me sound like a child molester.
But yeah, that's good advice. Keep it in mind.
It's just a general rule.
A lot of status quos are being challenged in this time. Revolutionary ideas are floating around. A lot of them very valid.
Yeah, but I don't think kissing a 10-year-old is ever going to be.
But this is one rule we should all follow. And, whatever circumstance, even if he is your dead husband, just don't.
It'd be an even more
I'm Brian O'Connell.
hard to sit through one is if her dead husband came back as a dog.
I would absolutely watch that movie. That would be amazing. That would be funny, I think. I wouldn't be able to.
I don't think there'd be any way to do that wasn't funny.
Yeah. But go watch Birth and stay safe.
Yeah, stay safe. For Celluloid Citizens, I'm Sean M. Thompson.
I'm Brian O'Connell.
And be open to possibilities, but not that open.